Welcome to today's Feather webinar. I'm joined by the wonderful Josh Birkholz, and he's going to be talking all about the Giving USA report. So for those of you who are joining to get a little insight on what's going on in the industry, trends you should be looking out for, insights from the report, Josh is going to go into a lot of detail, provide a lot of practical insights, recommendations, and just really walk us through what it all means. So welcome, Josh.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Yeah, great to have you. So while we wait for people to trickle in for a couple minutes, just go ahead and drop in the chat where you're joining from, just to kind of get a sense of who's in the room today. Josh and I were just chatting. So I'm located in Gainesville, Florida, and he told me that there's apparently an unspoken or unwritten, but like some kind of rule about not eating fried chicken with a fork, specifically in Gainesville, Florida. So I had never heard that before, but now I'm going to have to ask around and see if that's a thing. I mean, I fully
Tell me
believe.
if it's a real thing.
I hope I have not committed this faux pas, but yeah, good to know. All right, we've got people joining from California, Tennessee, all over the US. Welcome, welcome everyone. And Josh, you're joining from Minneapolis,
I'm in Minneapolis. Yep, that's right. And
Gainesville, Georgia.
I'm looking out at haze out my window. Canada's been giving us a lot of smoke this summer. We've got it
Okay.
again today.
Yep. Cool. Community housing innovations. Welcome. Washington State. Yeah. I'm jealous, Charisse. The Pacific Northwest is a region of the country that I have not visited yet, but it's at the top of my list. I feel like I keep waiting to like make a real good trip out of it. I don't want to just like go. It's absolutely at the top of my list, but I'm trying to hold off until I have the budget to like truly do like a 2 week full trip because it looks
I
absolutely
love Seattle. I can always get a table at Din Tai Fung there. In New York, you have to wait like 2 months. So there you can just walk in. It's so great.
Yeah, nice. Yeah, I haven't been to Seattle. I feel like there's so many. I feel like it's such a beautiful area for like cities and also just all of the nature, the coastline. So I am dying to go there. Boston Alliance of LGBTQ plus youth, welcome. I recently went to Boston for the first time, and that was lovely.
I see Mark from St. Paul. Good to see you, Mark.
Cool. Well, welcome to anyone who's just trickled in. I think we can go ahead and kick things off. I'm going to quickly run a little poll to see if anyone would like us to subscribe you to Feather's weekly newsletter. Let me just see where this one is. Okay, let me launch this one. So every Wednesday, Feather sends out what we call the Good Marketing Brief. So this is a weekly newsletter filled with templates, resources, all kinds of things. So we promote webinars like this one. We share industry news, all kinds of things that are happening in the world right now that relate to nonprofits, recommendations, helpful resources. So I think it's a great resource to get to your inbox every Wednesday. So go ahead and put a yes. Lots of people are already subscribed, which is great. So yeah, I'll leave that running for just a couple minutes. And then yeah, if you hit yes, I'll go ahead and sign you up so you don't have to click on anything. You'll start getting those next Wednesday. So keep dropping answers in. And then yeah, and just a little housekeeping, we will be sending out the slide deck and the recording tomorrow. So you can expect those in your email inbox tomorrow morning. But yeah, I will go ahead and pass it off to you, Josh, to introduce yourself and go ahead and dive into the content.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Isa. Thank you to Feather for inviting me to present to you all on the Giving USA and generosity in America. I'm Josh Birkholz. I'm the CEO of BWF, a partner organization with Feather. We're really happy to collaborate. I've been also on the board of Giving USA for many years. I just finished my term as the chair of the board this past year. And I led the methodology of it for 10 years. One of my top professional I guess, privileges over the years was when the first copy of Giving USA was put into the Smithsonian. They had me speak at the Smithsonian for that honor, and it was really quite amazing. So, Giving USA has been a report on U.S. philanthropy dating back to the 1950s under the Giving USA name. In the 60s, we're actually 75 years in right now, in terms of under the current branding and so forth. And we're really quite proud of it. Just the roots of it, and let me advance to the first slide here, is it's the longest running annual report on U.S. charitable giving. And it started back in 1956. There was a group called the American Association of Fundraising Council. It was all the consulting firms that help nonprofits said, let's combine and let's all fund one big measurement so we know is the needle moving on philanthropy and so forth. Well, the American Association of Fundraising Council rebranded as the Giving Institute and broadened, and it's basically the professional association of the for-profit companies that are serving nonprofit fundraising. So this would include not just the consulting firms, but the great marketing companies like Feather, the screening companies, the technology like Rear Blackbaud, Virtuous, et cetera, the companies that have CRMs, and really even more than that. And it's been a wonderful opportunity for companies that might be competitive with each other to actually really collaborate. It really sparks joy for me to work with my colleagues in the industry to really move that needle. And it's funded by donor gifts from those members. Certainly everyone can give. You can all go to Giving USA Foundation and give a gift to that. It's certainly most welcome. The top funders are those member companies, and it's also makes money off of the subscription. And I do encourage you to subscribe. That's the best way to get the catalog of data, the most recent reports. You get discounts on the actual paper copies. Some people, I go to a lot of organizations that have a physical copy of Giving USA going way back. Some people say it's like the almanac of philanthropy in the United States, and it's really cool. And I would also add, we've been really helping globally too to help replicate it. We've just sponsored fellowships in Central Europe to help build up philanthropy tracking there. We're working with the country of Vietnam this next year in terms of a fellowship, and we have a global philanthropy committee. So we're not just USA focused. Our foundation is trying to help the world move the needle, shared intelligence for the greater good, and to understand the true nature of private support. So I'm going to just jump right into the numbers. And again, feel free if there's questions to add in the chat. He's just going to help me monitor that while I'm speaking. If there's some clarifying questions, I can jump in. I'll certainly try to leave time at the end. I'm a storyteller, and you might say I'm a consultant, so I can say a lot of things without saying anything. I'm going to try to have it all be really worthwhile information and on point. But we can go long, so I'll do my best to not do that. Giving in the United States did reach a high in 2024. And I should clarify that we're in the middle of 2025, so we won't know till next June of next year what the final 2025 results are because of the source of data being from the IRS and some other sources that we have to wait till the year is complete. But it reached 592 billion. So that's more than half a trillion. And it represents about 2% of the GDP in the United States is charitable giving. That's about the size of it. And it reached a high in current dollars. We've never said a number this high like we did this year. But as you recall, 2021 and 2022, there was really high inflation. So as we inflation adjust the past years, 2021 in inflation adjusted terms is the record by inflation adjusted. This year's the record in terms of current dollars, like that was launched in that year. So we'll see how inflation adjusts the past and so forth. So 2021 is the best year on record. And one thing I like to point out is even though giving is affected by the economy, certainly there's no question about it. The yellow bars on here are when there was actual recessions in the United States. And when we track through time, any year there was a recession, and did giving go up or did it go down? Giving actually went up during recessions more than it went down. Now, we did have 4 times where it went down in the last 40 years. The biggest hit was the 2008, 2009, kind of the big short Great Recession kind of time period. That was probably the biggest hit. There was some pandemic disruption in business model for the charities, like in certain sectors like the arts and whatnot, but really giving climbed through, and actually in some ways in response to some of the disruption, there was big growth in giving in the early pandemic years. So giving has increased more than has gone down, and it does tend to follow the markets. While I said It's about 2% of the GDP. It doesn't follow the GDP quite as closely. GDP might go up and giving will go down and vice versa. And part of that is because giving has become more and more shifting towards the higher wealth audiences. And not completely so, but the dollars are driven by the wealthy people. The percentages are the everyday donors, the number of people giving. And as more and more the giving is from the high wealth audience, we start to see that giving is tracking closer with asset markets. So the S&P 500 is a better predictor of giving than the GDP actually is. GDP is related to corporate giving in some other areas. So when we talk about giving in the United States, we say who's giving and what are they giving to. So in the who's giving, the historical categories which we're still using are individuals, foundations, bequests, and corporations. Now, one would argue a bequest is an individual, but technically in IRS terms, it's an estate. But those numbers are reflected here. Everything went up, but bequests went down. I would say that bequests are very volatile and they're very subject to outlier effects. So I don't put a lot of stock in it. It'll go up, it'll go down, and it's really tough to say that there's a trend there. They're more likely following actuarial tables. Unfortunately, there was a higher death rate a few years ago, and they had a higher bequest rate in response to that. But some would also point out that foundations, the majority of those foundations are family foundations and gifts out of donor advised funds and a community foundation. And we've estimated that actually as much as 80 to 85% of giving decisions are made by one individual person, even if it's manifest through their giving through their company or they're giving through a foundation or by a bequest. So it's still individual people is a big part of this business and relationships with individuals. So one thing that might not sound exciting, but it's kind of good to the economists, is 2024 was the first year that kind of looked normal. I don't know if that's a weird thing to say, but there's so much not normal in the last 5 years since the pandemic. And the rates of growth, the changes, were tracking like they were before the pandemic. There was some stability. Now, many would say 2025 is certainly not a normal year, and there's a lot of argument to say, yes, it's going to probably be a very different year, but 2024 looked like a pretty standard year in terms of some growth. The giving rates grew similar to the 40-year average. The financial markets had a strong year. The other indicators, economically, it was actually a pretty good year, 2024. We saw growth in the economy. It was very stable. Inflation was moderated, and there's a financial security linked to giving, not just in how the numbers manifest, but also just in our psychology. When things are uncertain, there's like some holding back. One real tangible example is multi-year pledge activity. If I'm going to pledge a gift over 5 years, there's a certain confidence I'm going to have that I'm going to have the money over the next 5 years. When we see recessions or when we see instability, like we saw, especially in March, April, May, around some of the initial tariff launches, we saw this year a lot of differences in confidence ratings, frankly. And one of those that pulled back is there was sort of a resistance to commit to multi-year pledges. It's actually a little bit better now. In fact, the economy is quite a bit better now than it was in April, but there's still some volatility markers there. And so individuals, now they remain the largest source of giving. So we talk about this starting back in the 1950s. Individuals back then were around 80%, and it was in the high 70s, even in the 1980s. So this number keeps going down, and the foundation number keeps getting larger. It went from like 6% up to 19%. Now, the reality of this is a lot of this is reflected in the shift to donor advised funds. A lot of individuals, when they put their money into donor advised funds and then give out of that fund, if that fund is hosted at a nonprofit or at a community foundation, that's going to look like a gift from a foundation in terms of the IRS tracking. And so some of this is that, some of it is structuring very wealthy people setting up foundations. So I would say the trend is not necessarily that individuals are going down. It remains the top source of giving. It's that there's a higher degree of individuals structuring their philanthropy, giving in ways other than just writing a check or gifting their stock. They're starting to set up other mechanisms to give. So foundation went from 6% in 1982 to 19%. That's probably been one of the biggest changes in the source over time, and it's a shift that keeps changing. Now, we've also calculated there's certain gifts that would move the needle as outlier effect, these multi-hundred-million-dollar gifts, and it's a calculation as a percentage of the total that this one gift was, and it's classified as the mega giving. And based on the total, that threshold kind of shifts. It's been about on par. There are certainly some mega philanthropic gifts. About 11 to 12 billion is about the number that are some really large. These are multi nine-figure gifts in terms of their impact on it. The stock market was very favorable. We saw the S&P 500 climb, and honestly, it's really quite close. When it went down in a few years back, uh, what we noticed, I think it was in 22 when it went down. If you recall, the S&P 500 also went down quite a bit that fourth quarter. A lot of economists say hope for the disruption in the market to be earlier in the year so that it still ends up, because giving will probably end up if the stock market ends up. Right now, the biggest disruption was second quarter, first to second quarter, and it's been really quite good since then. So if all things stay equal, it'll probably be an up year in 2025, even with all the disruption. But there's some changes certainly that are going to impact that. Consumer sentiment was another one that was up, and it's similar. Your willingness to go spend money at a store is similar to your money to give, your comfort in giving a gift to a charity. Certainly, when the economy's tough, you can't afford milk, eggs, or gas. You're not going to use extra money to give a gift. So we know there's been an impact on the everyday donor, which has had a shadow cast over it by the wealthy people that have still been giving very large gifts, which is making up the dollars. So the corporate giving is one that a lot of people are really watching closely, because we've had 5 years of really record dollars from corporations. It's been about a 30% growth in 5 years, and people are like, wow, this is just like on fire, corporations giving. But the reality is it's been growing slower than their own profits have been giving. So the percent of profits have not gone up. They're making so much more money. So percentage wise, it's kind of on par. Now, it was dipping lower a couple years ago to 0.8% of their profits were given charitably. It was 1.1% this last year. And back in the 1980s, it was 2%. So we've seen a gradual 40-year decline in the percent of the profits they give to charity. Now, many would say that there's a broadening, that they're still spending about the same on corporate benevolence, like DEI programs or ESG, impact investing, things that they're doing because they think it's good for society. The percentage of their profits that go to registered charities, which is what Giving USA measures, might have been going down. Now, there's a lot of concerns because the recent tax legislation in the bill that just came through, the big beautiful bill, as many call it, might adversely affect this, because what has been introduced is a 1% AGI for corporate deductions. What that simply means is that the first 1% is not tax deductible. They get a deduction for giving over 1%. And corporate giving is sitting right around 1%. So some are saying that on average, they're losing the tax deduction. So, but if you gave 2%, you would get the 1%, half of it would still be deductible. So some are theorizing our corporation's going to bundle, meaning not give this year, but give twice as much next year so that they can get the deduction. We don't know how they're going to react to this. Is it tax driven or not? Some would say it could affect the pass-through giving. That's where the corporations pass on their tax deduction to consumers by you giving the dollar at the cash register. You're helping to fund their tax deduction in some ways. It is charitable. I'm not meaning that to sound snarky, but because of they're losing some of the tax benefit. Is there going to be some risk to that point of sale giving? I guess time will tell, but that's a big topic of conversation in the recent tax legislation. Now, giving by foundations, I mentioned they had been growing over time. They've reached a current dollar high and exceeded 100 billion for the third consecutive year. So they just crossed 3 years ago the $100 billion mark in giving from foundations. Again, biggest growth area there is wealthy people structuring foundations or giving to donor advised funds. Now, another thing too is I mentioned where gifts are coming from, and then where they're going to. And so we've been using the IRS classification. You can see religion, education, human services, gifts to grant-making foundations. It's like giving to the community foundation, for example, or setting up a foundation. You give money to your foundation. That would be a gift to a grant-making foundation. Healthcare. which is actually, I should point out, academic medicine is not included in healthcare. So if it's a teaching hospital or they do research and they're classified as academic medicine, IRS classifies them in education. So there's some very big healthcare like Mass General, the Mayo Clinic, Johns Hopkins that would show up in education, and not the healthcare. So more the health systems and hospitals are in that health category, than those large prestigious academic medicine you might think of. Public society benefit are the large federated charities like your United Way, but it also is where the National Donor Advised Fund sponsoring organizations are. So like Fidelity, Schwab, and Vanguard are actually showing up in this public society benefit category. And that's been growing largely from the donor advised fund effect is what's affected public society benefit. Arts, culture, humanities is the one that actually says what it describes it quite well. International affairs, giving to overseas, international relief, development, etc., and environment and animals, which are lumped together. Conservation around, like your Ducks Unlimited is right next to your Sierra Club or your Nature Conservancy, for example. Now, all of them showed a growth in current dollars. When we applied inflation adjustment to those, religion was a statistical decline. Even though it grew about 2%, it went down in inflation. It didn't go up as much as inflation went up. And we say the Gifts to Grant Making Foundation became a statistical tie. It's slightly positive. So in terms of our report, we're saying 7 of them actually went up in real and current dollars. Gifts to Grant Making was a kind of a statistical flat, and religion was a statistical decline. The biggest growth in donor advised fund had been in those national donor advised fund sponsoring groups. So some of those subsectors, this is another thing that's changed over time. You can see in 1984, and we have that year brought up kind of a 40-year record, partly because we've been working with the Lilly Family School of Philanthropy at Indiana University, and they started tracking in the 80s. So we have the best comparable data with similar methodology back to this time. When we first started doing Giving USA, religion was about 75% of philanthropy in the United States. Now it's about 23%. Now that number has continued to go up, but the others have gone up more so that the portion has decreased. And education had been the second highest for many, many years. The last 2 years, human services has passed education. Now it's just slightly above. It's kind of you might say a rounding error, but for 2 years consecutively, human services has been a higher amount. Religion and education have kind of been the top philanthropic areas. We also see that in generation numbers. Like baby boomers tend to give to religion and education at a higher rate. Religion is the top recipient for all age groups, but we've seen in younger groups rise in environment and healthcare, where we've seen a decline of education in each age group. So Gen X, it's like number 4 on the list. Millennial, it's like 5. Gen Z, it's like number 7 in terms of where their focus is. So we are seeing some generational shifts of what type of charities people are passionate about, which is factoring in. Most of the giving, though, to be honest, is really probably skewed towards older people because we're going by dollars, and the volume of dollars or the amount of money is really towards older generations still. So that'll be something we see over the upcoming decades, unless it's a stage of life related, but it does seem to be some real shifts in attitudes there. So on the giving to religion, so I want to point out, I mean, it was at 23%. Back in the day, it was 75%. It's actually relevant to secular charities as well. If you look at some of the Lake Institute studies on faith and giving, people that are religiously active, that means they participate in their synagogue, mosque, or church 4 times or more a month, on average give 4 times more in dollars to even secular charities. And when people are less religious, they're less charitable. And it might be belief-based and all of that. I'm not going to get into the religious aspect of it. But one thing that's been pointed out by some charities is religion has the most modeled philanthropy for young people. And what that means is, let's say a proverbial church growing up, you might see your parents pass the offering plate and put money in. They've witnessed giving 4 times a month. So some are saying it's actually the modeled philanthropy that's decreasing. Some of the large charities that say do Like you pay $1 at the cash register, and they put a little sticker behind the wall that you gave, like maybe Children's Miracle Network, St. Jude, and so forth. Someone pointed out that the target of that is not those dollars that are raised as much as they are the children in the shopping cart seeing their parents give. So there's new ways that people are replicating modeled philanthropy. But one would point out that while it went from three-fourths to one-fourth, religious attendance over the last 75 years has also moved from three-fourths to one-fourth. So some of the everyday giving declines are economically linked, religious decline. The reasons why that is the case, that's a different discussion, but it is something that has been tracking together with that for the everyday donor. Because also religion as a recipient gets more middle class and everyday donor gifts, where say a university gets more of the high net worth dollars, for example. So there's some shift in the everyday donor that way. In terms of
So
donor advised fund, oh,
real
go
quick,
ahead.
Josh, there's a question in the chat. Just clarifying. I think the answer to this is yes, but Delphina asked, religious people donate more, but religious giving as a whole has gone down. Is that correct?
Religious people give more, and that's to secular and religious charities. It makes sense for religious, but also to secular. Religious giving has declined as a percent of the pie, but technically in current dollars, it has continued to go up over all these years. It's just giving to other areas has grown at a faster rate. This last year specifically, it did go down in inflation adjusted terms. Religion has not been keeping pace with inflation for about 5 years. So the answer is yes. Religious giving has gone down in inflation adjusted terms. Some would argue the number gets higher every year, but not as fast. But that is correct.
Cool. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. So donor advised funds, 1 in 4 of the donor advised funds were open since 2020. It's really rapidly increased, partly because all of the minimums at many of them have decreased. There's no minimum dollar level to set up a donor advised fund. So we're seeing lower income folks also setting these up lower than the high net worth, which were the early adopters of this. There's a lot of concern that these are anonymous gifts. We don't know. It's actually about less than 4% of gifts from DAFs are actually truly anonymous. They can be tracked back. That's probably a gift processing question if they're showing up as anonymous on your system. About half of them actually have less than 50,000 in them. So these are not all big wealthy accounts. About 54% granted out more than 50%. There's actually a better flow than people realize, but you should acknowledge that some do have a lot of money in their donor advised fund. I did meet with one donor I was meeting with who sold his company, and a big portion of it he passed through into a donor advised fund to help with taxes. And it was a very large chunk that went in there. And I was asking him about that, and he said, it's sort of like my 401k for giving. He has enough to give 250,000 a year for the rest of his life. And he's like, I love giving. I love going to events. I love meeting with people. And I want to be able to do this in my final chapter. So in his mind, it was like his savings account for giving, which it's hard to say that's a bad thing because he is going to want to spend that all down to his lifetime. But there's a lot of concern that people are hoarding the money in there. There's actually a better flow in some of the reports. Giving USA does have a report on donor advised fund. If you're a subscriber, you can access that and read some of that, what the pass-through rate is. But certainly there's a lot of opinions and there are a lot of behaviors because there's so many of them that we're going to see a large picture of how people behave with their donor advised funds. So the subsectors that grew the most actually came off of declines in 2023. And so I should point that out, like to measure a whole sector in 1 year is probably not doing it justice. It's probably better to look at longer trends. But in 2023, we had statistical flat or slight declines in international affairs, education, public society benefit, each of which had double-digit growth in 2024. Now, international affairs is usually subject to international events, and there have been international events Gaza being one of them, Ukraine, where people have been giving towards international at a higher rate in those because of those years. Education in some ways was a recovery, public society benefit, probably the DAF effect. They all had weaker 2023s for various factors. One of the things that I should add, like with DAF specifically, I'm not trying to make this about DAFs, but I think it's important to realize is people that become a little bit more tax savvy realize it's better to gift my gains. So if my stock appreciated, if I sell that, I have to pay taxes on that. And then if I give that money, then I'm giving the money and I might get a tax deduction. But if I gift that stock, the gains are not taxable. It's passed through on that, and that's a better benefit. So what we see is some people, when they're having big gains in the market, they're transferring stock at a higher rate to a donor advised fund. And when the market's down, they're sort of smoothing out and being able to give at the same level because it's better to sell when their stock is at a loss. So there is kind of a smoothing effect happening in when they give to their donor advised fund and when they give out of it. So we do see some reaction to the stock market in funding and so forth. The double digit growth sectors, usually when we see it, it is current events like with international affairs. Sometimes mega gifts can swing it. You get a huge, multi nine-figure level gift, corrections from previous years, but the long-term trends, I think is a takeaway, are more important so look at it over time. So I want to so those are the high level numbers. I want to talk about the industry trends that are around these numbers. And so one of those is certainly we've been coming through lots of change in the last 5 years. And I've listed them out here. Probably inflation was the most radical in its effect on giving numbers, but also giving behaviors on the others. Like certainly some of the growth in 2021 was racial justice, which was a top recipient category during that time period. Certainly tax policy has had an impact. Tax Cuts and Job Act had a real negative effect on mid-level giving. So those that were itemizers and were no longer itemizers, we saw about a 13% dip in that category of people. So tax policy, even though when you survey people say, I'm not influenced by taxes, we have seen in a macro sense tax policy does affect giving. So we don't want to bury our head in the sand when tax policy changes. We want to try to study and understand that and how to maximize the opportunities with that situation. Certainly there's been a lot of changes and perhaps the economic headwinds of inflation, certainly that 2021 and 2022 have been unprecedented. It's been moderate right now, been kind of at a moderate stability, but regardless, there's still a cumulative effect of inflation because these things are additive on top of each other. So things cost a lot more than they did 5 years ago, and we feel that, we see that, and that does affect consumer sentiment and it affects confidence in giving. It's something that has been really pushing on the charitable sector. Now, the charitable sector is more resilient than almost any other sector to economic woes, but when there's economic dips, it does go down, and when it sometimes, not always, sometimes it's flat or doesn't go up as much. But when the market goes up, giving will often exceed how the market went up. So it is related to the economy, no question about it. But the biggest story in really the last couple decades has been the decline of the everyday donor. So the number of people that give in the United States is fewer this year than it was last year, and it's been for multiple decades. This is not per capita. The actual number of people that give a charitable gift has declined. And this number, I want to point out, Giving USA does not track the donor counts. We track the dollars. Our main source of data for that is the Fundraising Effectiveness Project, which is affiliated with AFP and with Giving Tuesday. And I do recommend looking at the FEP report, subscribing. It's really great data on the everyday donor and those donor trends in the United States. But it's caused a lot of people to ask the question, has giving become something just for the rich? And there's been a lot of pushback on that we can recapture giving as a value. One thing that we know is impact-based messages really resonate with wealthy individuals, and a lot of the messaging has shifted towards impact. I want to give because I want to solve a big problem. Maybe even as a wealthy individual, get some credit for having solved that I personally made some impact. I had some significance. Some would say someone who could buy a yacht or a plane or have multiple houses can't buy that I mattered, but they can give so that they matter, so that there's some way that they're buying significance. I don't love the language, but it kind of makes sense, and I do follow the argument. And so some have said, because we've shifted that impact message, because we want those dollars for campaigns or for our charities, we're missing out that some of the everyday donor who doesn't believe my $50 is making that much of an impact might feel less included. And we've lost some of the intrinsic value messaging, like giving feels good. It's better to give than to receive, or people like us do things like this to steal from Seth Godin. This kind of concept of while I might not have significance, me being part of this community does have significance. And some charities have latched onto that. Charity Water is a good example where they will say, not necessarily give to charity, but join this group of people that choose to give to Charity Water. They're giving the same value to the community of donors as they are to the giving behavior. And so hopefully more community value and intrinsic value messages can help combat that. But the other thing that should be pointed out is the definitions of generosity are broader than giving to charity. So if you give to a GoFundMe, if you give a large tip, you give to your friends and family, you're taking someone in through hospitality. That's very generous activity. And many would argue that generosity has a decrease. It's the act of channeling my generosity and gifts to registered charity is what we've seen decrease among the middle class. So one thing that we're studying, as well as many other groups are studying, is trying to get a full picture of generosity in America, in addition to giving to charity in America. I know it's a subtle distinction, but we do want to be inclusive of all the ways people in our communities are generous and be supporting all generosity. Now, a bright spot in this, however, was Giving Tuesday. So, Giving Tuesday is a big event many of us know about, the Tuesday after Thanksgiving, the Giving Tuesday organization, and they have kind of a microcosm of one big day of giving, and they can track what the trends on that day were. And we've seen the same trend over time that the counts have decreased and the dollars have increased. 2 years ago, I think the dollars remained flat, but the participants went down. So each year it's larger gifts from fewer people that keep it going up. Now we still saw larger gifts, so we did see an upward movement in terms of gift size, but we actually saw growth in participation in 2024. 7% more people participated in Giving Tuesday. So it was a bright spot that we're starting to see some trends. One thing that I should point out in that fall is actually before I get to that, and I think I probably have a slide about this later, is there's been a lot of emphasis on this in the Generosity Commission. So I'll talk about that in a second because I think I have a slide specific to that. Another thing in 2024 that around these numbers is trust has been on a decline in the nonprofit sector over many years. In fact, in 2023, people ranked their trust in the government and in big corporations as higher than their trust in nonprofits. Now nonprofits have moved back above those two. It actually grew 5% for 2023, so they're above those two, but we're just above those. So some are like, well, what can we do as a sector to build trust in nonprofits, show the proof of the impact, the social good? Still, about 45% believe nonprofits actually make things better. So there's an efficacy argument that needs to be made still, that we're effective in meeting our missions, or we're effective in trying to meet our missions, that we're actually making things better. It's something that we've been tracking and has had some impact, that trust. We've also seen in higher education it climbed a little bit, which they've been the one it's been the most rapidly falling, has been trust in higher education for multiple factors. Some kind of the shifts around DEI, some have been around just the cost of education and student loan debt and other things. A lot of political polarization around higher education at the moment, and in terms of how they're dealing with different strong feelings by students and so forth. But in 2024, we actually did see a little bit of climb in higher education. Now, still, a third of US adults have little to no confidence, so there's work to be done, but it was the first year we started to see a turn towards the positive a little bit. Now, there'll be questions. 2025 might be one of the most disruptive years towards higher ed from a political perspective, but the charitable sector is really quite formidable, and private support is a real solution set. So we believe charitable giving is a solution to some of those challenges. Nevertheless, difficulties with NIH funding, as well as endowment and some of the tax legislation, will make it tricky for especially larger universities, those with 3,000 or more students. Not as bad legislatively towards like private colleges. There's actually some benefit towards smaller organizations. Another thing I want to mention is as we've seen it become more and more wealthy people and more structured through foundations and donor advised funds, we also know that wealthy people are more likely to give out of their assets. Everyday donors give out of their income. So most of us are everyday people. We work for a living and we ask at the end of the year, how much can I afford to give? And that means I'm giving out of my income, where we see wealthy people are giving out of assets that have already been appreciated. So there's an argument to be made that all charities should be kind of brushing up on charitable complex assets, how they structure gifts, taking gifts from crypto, from real property, from businesses, and so forth. Because as you point out, this is data from the Federal Reserve, also captured by Pyro Solutions out of the UK, but this is the US data. What we have is an exponential level of net worth. So someone with 10,000 net worth, 100,000, a million, 10 million, 100 million, and a billion. And how is their assets composed? For those of us with 10K or 100,000, our biggest assets probably our house, which is this orange, maybe our vehicles, and there's a little bit of maybe stock in our 401k, retirement is our pension plan. But as we go up in net worth, we see incredibly big growth in business assets. You see at a billion, pushing 80% of that wealth is held in some sort of business, in stock, my own ownership of companies that I own, and so forth. So you'll see that business assets grow as a piece of the pie. And in fact, Pyro Solutions, working with Fidelity, had looked at, of the gifts that are given to major gifts, what was the source of that money? Did they inherit it? Like, did they work for a living? And actually, 90.4% of the dollars that major donors give somehow was earned through business, their company, their an executive, their stock, and so forth. And many have pointed out that the intergenerational wealth transfer, which is enormous around the pike, but this next 5 years right now that we're in right now is probably the biggest period of retirements and business transition. As the boomers are retiring, this is kind of a peak year. There's a lot of people selling their companies. So being equipped to be part of that when you're selling, giving. Some have started founder societies like Plan Gift. If you ever sell your company, could we have 5% of the proceeds, like a bequest? We're seeing some growth in programs like that. So the Generosity Commission I mentioned, this was the first commission on philanthropy since the Filer Commission in 1975, which many people point to as really building the charitable sector. There was a lot of questions about the everyday actions of everyday donors and how do we reboost that. Many of the same companies in the Giving Institute, but also Rockefeller, Gates, the Stead, lots of really great philanthropists around giving, did a multi-source research project with multiple universities participating, Stanford, Indiana, Maryland, others as well, to put a report. This came out in Washington, D.C. in September. It's a Generosity Commission, or thegenerositycommission.org. It's a free report. I do encourage you to read that because it's a well-researched how to re-spark the everyday giving. And these are some of the key recommendations. The slides can be available. I'm going to save the time because I think Issa's looking at her clock like there's no way he's finishing this out. I'm just kidding. But you're going to see some shifts because of that, especially increased focus initially on some of the research and data. But there's a committee of the Giving Institute just working on putting some of these recommendations into action, as well as the Aspen Institute is very actively involved. Jane Wales there in leading this forward. So these are some of the high-level recommendations. I mentioned modeled philanthropy earlier. I'll just like a quick call out. One thing we've seen in the role of business, the leadership role in business, is where a generation ago, most people saw charitable giving for the first time in a religious setting. That's where they first witnessed charity. Now, the majority of people see the first time they had experience with giving is actually a workplace giving campaign. And so businesses doing workplace giving oftentimes are introducing charitable giving to a new generation. So how do we equip businesses, if that's often for many people the first time they see giving, to be better stewards, advocates, promoters of the charitable sector? AI certainly has been a topic, especially in the last few years. We've been using data for fundraising for many years, from prospect research in the 1980s to doing some of the initial demographic modeling and screening in the 90s, in-house predictive science, automated science, and basis in terms of simulation for business growth in the 2010s, a lot of the changes. And nonprofit sector has consistently used data for good. There's always exceptions. They make the press. And there's a belief that we're going to do it for good already in the charitable landscape. We're seeing AI around recommended next actions, simulating business, identifying prospects, certainly a strength area in our sector, generative content, even categorizing. Like one university that we worked with, they categorize all of the specialties of all their professors. So if they're with a donor who's like, I really care about sustainable agriculture in Central Africa, they can be like, all right, which professors have written articles on this? Like, oh, you should talk to Professor so-and-so to really shorten that timeline, kind of that search. There's companies like Practivated that do role playing to practice being a gift officer, constituent perception, donor mapping, a lot of talk about virtual avatar fundraisers, which in some organizations are out fundraising their individuals because they're working all night and they always hit their metrics. They don't need to sleep, but there's still some novelty effect. So we want to see what happens in this space. But there's a lot of quick movement. I'm not gonna, it's not an AI talk, but that's obviously one of the trends impacting giving. And another area is the talent gap. As long as I've been at BWF for 21 years now, and almost every year I could say there's been more work to do in nonprofits than we've had people. And some would say the gap is as much as 30%. There's actually a lot of hope that AI and automation will help close that gap. We've had a special talent disruptions, partly in some sectors like USAID affecting the international sector, NIH affecting some of the research nonprofits and so forth. So there is increased disruption. So there is a perennial challenge. Despite that, some of the placement firms are actually having increased placement. So there is movement. It's just shifting around the nonprofit landscape. We've also seen a big rise in donor experience programs. Starting to ask the question, not just cultivating people to give us a gift, but once they're a donor, what's it like to be a donor here? Are we really building a community so I enjoy my giving experience? A lot of action happening there, and a lot of conversations, moving from donor relations just being thanking people to actually saying, we're welcoming you into this community, because some of the data suggests that actually just having friends with other donors at the same nonprofit can increase lifetime value by up to 4 times. So there's been a lot of focus in this area. Some quick predictions, so I still leave some time for some questions. I do believe the policy impact, there's going to be some policy impact on nonprofits to the good and to the bad. The one that's to the good that I'm going to focus on for the sake of time is the universal charitable deduction. We really didn't think, I mean, we've been working on it, but many people working for years. A lot of credit to the Charitable Giving Coalition and Brian Flavin, who chairs that, have been really pushing that, because the House bill did not have any charitable deduction. There was hope we could get it on the Senate. Senator Langford is the one who pushed for it, and there was some thought that maybe we'd have a 1% AGI, but still there. It ended up getting a 0.5% AGI. What that simply means is even if you don't itemize your taxes and you take the standard deduction, you can still deduct your charitable giving over 0.5% of your income. So if you make $100,000 a year, your first $500 is not deductible, but $2,000 above that for your household is. So if you gave 2,500, you can deduct 2,000 on top of your standard deduction. We think that'll help on the everyday donor. There's some caps and some other things that might make it trickier on the wealthy, but there is some good and some bad in this tax policy. We've been trying to be pragmatic. This is one that's actually a really good thing that everyone can deduct. There's a way to deduct some of their charitable giving. We're seeing a lot of consolidation in the fundraising service and technology space. People are merging constantly. So it's just something to be aware of in that ecosystem that's been trending. A lot of private equity interest in the sector, partly because they've finally realized, oh, this is 2% of the GDP. Let's try to invest in this sector. And partly because of the Generosity Commission, but there's a kind of a resurgence in academic research and actual research to how do we grow private support, partly out of necessity, as we're seeing government support in a decline in many ways, that this is still a solution set that can help the charitable sector move forward. So we're seeing more academic research on how can we grow a more thriving charitable sector. On the AI front, I'm not going to say anything other than the fear of AI keeps decreasing each year. We're starting to get at peace with it. It's becoming commonplace. Everyone will be using AI in some ways if you're not already. We all have those stories. I have a daughter who's in graduate school right now. I remember helping her in a senior thesis with her econometric models, since I have a bit of a data science background. And she was asking me how to do these things. I'm like, oh, back when I was in college, I used SPSS for that. And she's using Stata in her econ department. And I'm like, I can tell you how to do that in SPSS. She's like, that's fine. ChatGPT will translate for us. So I'm on a Zoom call with my daughter at university with a ChatGPT window. She's asking me the questions. I'm saying, here's how I do an SPSS. She's typing the prompt, how would you do that in Stata? And taking those directions and running it. And it worked like flawlessly. Like, it's amazing. Even helping me get closer to my daughter over econometric models. I would have never guessed that, but it's a true thing. It's a true story. This increase on the everyday donor, recent tax policy is favorable. It's really critical to this whole sector that we're not just focusing on the wealthy. We do need to focus on the wealthy because those dollars are critical, but not at the expense of the everyday donor in our future. I would look at cryptocurrency. there was actually $1 billion in cryptocurrency given last year. That's going to grow. It's still early on, but $1 billion is a lot of money. Um, Being more comfortable with DAFs, thinking about different creative ways donors might help with loans or matching grants and otherwise. So that was high level. I kind of gave you the big numbers, some of the trends and what I predict. I know I talk kind of fast and I probably went through a lot of stuff, and I'm guessing there's a lot of questions. So I think I will take this moment to answer some of those, or at least speak to them. Like I said, I'm a consultant. I can talk without saying anything, but hopefully this was of value for all of you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Josh. I was about to just drop in the chat actually um, a webinar recording from a couple weeks ago, or actually it was from last week on AI for nonprofits. So I just dropped that link in there for anyone who wants to check out the webinar replay for that. We had another partner organization called Quiller AI come and speak about how nonprofits can use AI, sort of dispelling or demystifying some of the qualms and questions around how to get started with it, and just I think making it feel like a very accessible tool that can really make your life easier if you're strapped for time and budget, which, as we know, a lot of nonprofits are. So I just dropped that in there for anyone who'd like to check that out. Thank you so much. I know we have a couple of questions and comments in here, and I have a question I'd love to ask you more about, but I want to launch another quick poll just because I know people start to drop off at the top of the hour because they have other meetings to attend. So let me just launch another one real quick. So we haven't talked a whole lot today about Feather or BWF services, but I wanted to just get a sense of who is interested in learning a little bit more about either Feather, BWF, or both. So Feather helps you unite your touch points across the donor journey so you can kind of get to know your audience better, get in front of the right people, leveraging digital marketing to really understand how to yeah, connect better with your audience and get in front of the right people through digital ads, email marketing, analytics that kind of show you what's happening in real time so you can see what's working, where you need to move some budget around to really get the most out of your marketing efforts. So that's what Feather can do. Josh, if you want to say a little bit about BWF and your services.
Sure. Sure. Just at a very high level, we're a comprehensive consulting firm and technology company. Three main areas. One is campaign and fundraising programs, like helping to launch campaigns, or if we're at a run rate of A and we want to get up to B, what are the top ways we can get there? We're diagnostic, data driven analysis to find those pathways. Technology and operations, helping select technology systems, help implement those, as well as set up AI or business intelligence, better reporting, solve some of those problems. And then our third area, what we call our engagement and donor experience, where we're doing similar diagnostic point A to point B, but with the everyday donor, with the donor experience, and so that people can have a wonderful experience of giving. So yeah, thank you for that opportunity. We love what we do, and we love what you all do.
Yeah, same. So we got some yeses in here. So I will yeah, we will get back to you guys. Anyone who said yes in the chat, we will get back to you with some more information. So yeah, as for questions, I wanted to okay, so some great feedback in the chat, by the way. Becky says, wow, one of the most focused and succinct presentations I've been gifted in a long time. Can't use all of the information, but really will benefit from the context when planning and communicating with the public. So wonderful feedback.
Thank you.
I agree. This is all incredibly helpful. I think reports like this sometimes can feel a little bit overwhelming to digest. So kind of having you pick out the highlights and walking us through it, I think is great. So yeah, lots of people saying this is great data, helpful presentation. So thank you so much. Um, I wanted to revisit, there's one question around from Michelle. So are you asking corporations, you talked a lot about corporation funding. Are you asking why their funding has decreased? Might it be due to Citizens United or corporations directing more money to political campaigns?
Yeah. We've been trying to research this. It's a very broad sector, and even within that, larger corporations are cast in a shadow of what the smaller ones are. So trying to figure out what affects the dollars versus the broader participation. We do think there's a broadening in corporate philanthropy, similar to the example I use for individuals, where you might give to GoFundMe and other things that still show your generosity. The way they're doing other things that they would view as corporate benevolence might not be as much. In the past, their only option was, let's give to our local symphony, let's give to our community. They're doing other things and impact investing and so forth. We think it's been a broadening of that. There has been effect. I saw there's another question lower that kind of relates to this one around tariffs. I think there's some shift by different sectors. When sectors are doing really well, their philanthropy goes up. And when they go down, it goes down. And there's been some disruption. Like in April, we thought, consumer defensive, like groceries and those types of areas would go up in giving, where retail and or automotive, which were more dependent on tariffs, would decrease. It's still kind of a moving target right now on that. It's like certainly they're saying that though, which is what's relevant to this question, that we want to see how this all shakes out. I think the broader percentage of just increasing profits. The reality is, and I don't mean this to sound like a pessimist, but corporations are the most selfish of donors, meaning we give because it makes us look good. We benefit from research that charity does, or maybe for schools, we benefit from students that fill jobs that we have. The exception is when there's an individual at that corporation, more often this is private companies, that they're passionate about something. What we find is the passionate individual driving the corporate giving is very resilient, and the strongest philanthropic donor. The giving for benefit back to the company is the one that's most subject to disruption. And if they find another way to make us look good in this community that isn't giving to the local charity, they're going to probably do that because there's more of a benefit back. So really making the case to companies in that case and how we frankly make you look. I hope that that's an okay way for me to describe that. But that's why you often see giving to what's often considered non-controversial, like children's hospitals and zoos. Most people are not offended by children's hospitals or zoos. They get higher corporate support in some ways because it looks good to the community we're supporting the children's hospital. I know it's a short answer in a short Q&A, but I hope that was helpful.
Yeah. Rachel asks, you mentioned fewer people believe nonprofits make things better. Do you have any recommendations to help fight this conception? And I think that ties into the sort of general question I had around reaching younger people who might be a little bit more reticent to believe in institutions, and that includes nonprofit organizations. And so I know that like reaching younger donors is becoming more and more difficult. And I think, like you said, generosity hasn't decreased. People give to their friends and local organizations and things like that. But how can nonprofits sort of reach younger people and help dispel that notion that nonprofits are not trustworthy?
Well, some would say satisfaction is a good experience. So I had a good meal at this restaurant. Engagement is I've had so many good meals over time that now I'm engaged. Like this is my restaurant that I go to. And moving from just a good experience in the moment of the transaction to a extended positive relationship. I think that's key, especially with younger people, especially the younger generations today have a real need for authenticity and for the big to become smaller. So are we using corporate speak language? Do we look bigger, or are we bringing it down to their level? A quick example, George Washington University did a brilliant job of having different students assigned to different chunks of a couple thousand people, all doing the same content, but in their own style on TikTok style videos. And then those individuals would just see their student. And when they liked the video, the student would reach back out like, hey, you're the one from the video. And you're like responding that you liked my video. But it was scaled in such a way so that they could feel accessible to the person delivering the message. So, and it was really effective. They've had 2 years of consecutive donor growth, 10% growth in alumni giving, which is really counter to the industry right now. The takeaway on that is authenticity. The satisfaction engagement means are we showing over time that we're effective in trying to achieve our mission? Also, sharing when you're not doing well, but we tried really hard, can actually give more trust when the things are good. Because I believe you that you're telling me the truth. Authenticity requires an aspect of truth. Well, it requires truth, but and accessibility. So in a short amount of time, think about long-term engagement. What's it like to be a donor? Authentic messaging and make the big smaller. Hope that's a good starting point.
Definitely. And I think that bringing young people into the fold in terms of decision making and coming up with campaign strategies makes a huge difference. Have you seen any examples of this that like would be useful for people in the audience? Like how can I actually bring young people in a way that will make a difference?
Yeah. There are a few cases. I mean, some of the Do Good Institute at University of Maryland shows that pro-social behavior begets pro-social behavior. So a person being on jury duty is more likely to vote, is more likely to volunteer at charity, is more likely to give politically, is more likely to give charitably. These build upon each other. Like political giving actually makes you exercises the muscle of giving and makes you more likely to give. Charitable giving with young people, oftentimes, I mean, volunteering is an obvious place to start, but some more substantive than just service delivery. Like emerging leaders boards where they're helping to devise and craft helps give a little bit more ownership. The idea of bringing campaigns, I think that's a great idea. For years, the university sector, which has used students because they have them at their disposal, has used phone calling programs. Well, those calling programs haven't done as well as some of the other areas. Some do really well still. I'm not saying that that sector's completely declined, but people at university are being more creative in how we use them, like the George Washington University example. Let's have them use their superpower of
Mm.
small scale digital and social communications. So getting them involved from a volunteering perspective, and in real ways, not just service delivery. I'm not saying at the expense of, but ways where they can feel they're making decisions and that you're actually using their decisions so they see the authenticity of that role.
Yep, it's great advice. Um, uh, okay, I think that's all the questions for now. If anyone has any more, feel free to drop them in. We'll give like another 20 seconds. Um, if anyone has any last minute questions, but yeah, thank you so much, Josh. This was really helpful for me, and I know we're getting a lot of feedback in the audience, so I think this was just really great information, really well presented. So really appreciate you.
You. Thank you so much. And thanks to Feather for this opportunity. Appreciate all of you. Thanks for doing what you do. This sector, the strength is in all of us and us learning from each other. So, like shared intelligence for the greater good, it's an honor to be part of this greater good with all of you. So, go out there and be bold because your missions deserve it.
Yep. Amen. Cool. All right.
Nope.
Well, I think we can go ahead and call it. Thank you everyone for joining and have a good one. Bye.